All right, y'all, welcome to the show. I have a gigantic one for you today. A lot of big news. In fact, some big news just dropped like 5 minutes ago before I turned the camera on here. So we have some huge Supreme Court stuff about Trump. I'm going to lead with that in just a second. Then we have a very detailed segment for you on Israel lying about what's being called the Flower Massacre. They're also crushing Palestinians with tanks. I'm going to give you a warning in advance. I have some pictures on that front, even with it being blurred out. It is incredibly disturbing. We also have a micro example of the U.S. finally, maybe a little bit, un poquito, standing up to Benjamin Netanyahu. We'll dive into that. Then later on, we have a devastating new poll for Joe Biden, perhaps his worst ever. A CNN host breaks with Biden for being a little cuck to the Israeli government. That's a fascinating clip, not something I thought I'd see from a CNN host. And then we have multiple examples. Trump did some rallies over the weekend, over the past like 3 or 4 days, and we're talking colossal brain malfunctions. Honestly, almost at the point of Joe Biden when he brought up talking to Francois Mitterrand, who died in 1996. He wanted to say Macron, but his brain shot him back to the 1990s. Back when he was last fully cognizant. So we got Trump doing the same thing now. This is wild, man. This is wild. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Everybody do me a big favor and subscribe to the channel. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. All right, so the U.S. Supreme Court just ruled that former President Trump can remain on the ballot, citing that enforcement of Section 3 of, that's supposed to say the 14th Amendment, falls under the jurisdiction of Congress, not state authorities. So let me give you some more specifics on this, and then I'll give you why I think on the merits this is a bad decision. Now, it's not exactly unexpected. Everybody else seemed to be like 100% sure the Supreme Court was going to side with Trump on this. I actually wasn't. I said it was about 70-30. I thought 70% chance they side with Trump, 30% chance they don't. And the reason why I even gave it 30% that they would side against him is because a lot of these people on the Supreme Court, they're Mitt Romney-style conservatives, right? They're highly educated. They're elitist. They break with Trump with some of his more egregious actions like January 6th. A lot of Trump's own appointed judges laughed him out of the courtroom when he tried to say that the election was stolen and he had won the election. So, that's a big deal, right? And the other reason I thought perhaps this might cut in the other direction is that the argument used by various courts who ruled on this issue, they used an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. In other words, if you go by the plain-faced reading of the Constitution, Trump is in violation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. In other words, the idea is he tried to do an insurrection, and if somebody tries to do an insurrection, they can no longer hold any elected office. So, but of course, they didn't rule in that direction. They ruled with Trump. So let's break this down a little bit. A group of Colorado voters contends that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits former President Donald J. Trump, who seeks the presidential nomination of the Republican Party in this year's election, from becoming president again. The Colorado Supreme Court agreed with that contention. It ordered the Colorado Secretary of State to exclude the former president from the Republican primary ballot in the state and to disregard any write-in votes that Colorado voters might cast for him. Former President Trump challenges that decision on several grounds because the Constitution makes Congress, rather than the state, responsible for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates. We reverse. So, in other words, their argument is, okay, Congress would have to be responsible for making the decision to say Trump can't run anymore because he violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. They're saying the onus is on Congress to make that decision. It's not on various state courts or various secretaries of state. They have no say on an issue like this. The primary and sole responsibility lies with Congress. So in other words, if Congress had stepped up at the time and said, right after January 6th, for example, when everything was at a fever pitch, if they said, sorry, Trump, you can't run for president again, and we're going to make sure of it, we're going to, do an official declaration, or we're going to do a bill that says you have violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, you can't do it. At that point, the Supreme Court would say, you know what, fair enough, he can't run. So what's interesting is that even in this decision, which is 100% pro-Trump, they are not coming out and saying, it wasn't an insurrection. They're not saying that. They're just saying the responsibility falls to Congress to make that decision. So to give you some more on this here, this is in Axios. Supreme Court rules Trump can appear on Colorado ballot. Former President Trump cannot be barred from Colorado's primary ballot under the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously on Monday. It's a major win for the GOP presidential frontrunner and paves the way for him to appear on the ballot nationwide, despite facing eligibility challenges in dozens of states. So by the way, that's the other thing. This isn't really limited to Colorado. This was the Colorado case, but this has wide-ranging implications that all the other states where he was kicked off or maybe going to be kicked off, now that's reversed. So Maine, for example, he was kicked off there. Now he's going to be back on the ballot there. Illinois, same thing. Now remember, they also did this in a timely fashion. They made the decision quickly because they wanted to have the decision before the election, so there's no ambiguity. So we have Super Tuesday tomorrow, and they come in with the decision the day before Super Tuesday. They continue here. The court's decision comes a day before Super Tuesday when more than dozens of states, including Colorado, will hold primary contests. Quote, because the Constitution makes Congress rather than the states responsible for enforcing Section 3 against federal officeholders and candidates, we reverse, the Supreme Court wrote in the decision. The nation's high court concluded that states have no power under the Constitution to enforce Section 3 with respect to federal offices, especially the presidency. In addition to Colorado, Maine has also moved to bar Trump from its ballot over his role in the Capitol riot. The rulings were paused pending the Supreme Court's decision. The former president's ballot eligibility has been challenged in more than 30 states using the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause. The Supreme Court agreed in January to take up Trump's appeal of the Colorado Supreme Court's December ruling, which found the former president is ineligible for the ballot. The argument centered on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, blah, blah, blah. You guys know the rest of that. So look, the question is, did they get this right? Did they actually take the plain-face reading of the Constitution and apply it? Well, to answer that question, the most straightforward thing we could do is go to that portion of the Constitution. So here's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Here's what it says. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Okay, so we have one sentence left, nothing about Congress, right? Here we go. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So let me explain what they're saying there. What they're saying is somebody commits an insurrection and they're kicked off the ballot. Congress has the right and the ability, if they so choose, to step in, and if it hits a vote of 2/3 or more, they can remove that disability. In other words, they could say, you know what, we don't care that you try to do an insurrection. We're going to let you run. If 2/3 or more of Congress decides, we don't care that you try to do an insurrection, you can go ahead and run, then that disability is removed. So in the amendment, in crystal clear language, they are saying Congress has the ability and the authority, if they want, to remove that disability. They're not saying that the first decision has to come from Congress. By the plain face reading of the language, it could come from the Supreme Court of the United States. It can come from various state courts. Now, by the way, remember, when it comes to elections, states get massive leeway in how they run their respective elections. So if a Secretary of State in a given state, or if a state Supreme Court decides, sorry, by our analysis, you violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, there's nothing in this portion I just read you, which is what's in question, there's nothing that would nullify that decision. So what the Supreme Court did here, let's be clear, they just made up a ruling. It's just totally made up. They just decided this is what we want to be the conclusion, so we're going to find some justification or rationalization to get to that point. That's what happened. Let me read it one more time. The final section. The first part is very, very clear. If you engage in insurrection, you can't hold any office. That's like the Cliff Notes version of the first part of this. The final sentence says the following. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So in other words, if a state Supreme Court or a Secretary of State in a various state says, sorry, you can't be on the ballot, you tried to commit an insurrection, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, you're disqualified. If Congress says, we disagree, and now we're going to vote on it, and guess what? 2/3 just voted, they get to go back on the ballot. Fine, then Congress wins. They get to go back on the ballot. It doesn't say the original decision has to come from Congress. It doesn't say that. That is completely made up by the Supreme Court. So look, now where are we? Well, we're in the place that most people thought we would be anyway. That all of these attempts to kick Trump off the ballot are not working. It's now guaranteed. It's set in stone. He's allowed to be a presidential candidate. That's where we are. He's allowed to be a presidential candidate. Isn't it interesting, though, and this just occurred to me, isn't it interesting that when it comes to decisions that are more pro-Trump, we seemingly get them in a timely fashion. But when it comes to the 91 felony charges against him, there seems to be a lot of roadblocks and a lot of stalling and a lot of, hey, I don't know, maybe not, we'll get the decision before the election and before Inauguration Day. So whenever it's a decision that helps him, rush it. We got to get this done. We got to get it done. Whenever it's a decision that may hurt him and hurt him colossally, and in fact take him off the field for this presidential race, for those, it's, sorry, we got to take our sweet time. Who knows when we're going to get to it? Maybe we will, maybe we won't before the big day, before the election. So that is frustrating, and we are full speed ahead towards a constitutional crisis. Because what we've learned from the various civil cases against Trump is he's not Teflon anymore. He's just not. He's found guilty of bank fraud and insurance fraud and tax fraud and all the stuff with E. Jean Carroll, the sexual charges with E. Jean Carroll. He has to pay out over $400 million. You know, his businesses are just destroyed effectively. So he's not Teflon anymore. Those are just the civil cases. 91 criminal charges. If he goes down on even some of those, it's a constitutional crisis, number one. Number two, he's kind of taken off the field, right? But we don't know when we're going to get the conclusion. So, in theory, it could happen after the election, after he already wins. And then what? He appeals. If he's in the White House, I mean, everybody seems to agree you can't actually criminally go after a sitting president. At that point, it is true that all you could do is impeach, right? So, we would just be stuck with him for 4 years, and all this stuff would be on hold. So anyway, very, very frustrating decision. Can't say it's all that surprising. I must admit, everybody else was right with their 100% certainty that the Supreme Court is going to side with Trump. Like I said, I was more 70-30, but 70-30 is still a pretty clear number. And it turns out that, you know, Crystal makes a good point about this. She says she doesn't think that they want to insert themselves into this process in such an egregious way. You know, it's more, they don't want to be known as the people who come in and derail the timeline, right? They're bitches. They're bitches. They want to like let it all play out and they get the front row seat. They're not the ones who are the referees, right? And so, yes, that dynamic, that instinct would lead them to make a decision like this, even though, like I said, it is totally made up. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.